believing and making people believe. I love the word believe. In general, when one says, I know, one does not know. One believes. Marcel Duchamp, Duchamp du Cygne. Leon Poliakov once said that Jews are Frenchmen who, rather than no longer going to church, no longer go to the synagogue. In the humorous tradition of the Haggadah, that joke relegates to the past beliefs that no longer organize practices. Today, political convictions seem to be following the same path. One becomes a socialist to have been one, without going to demonstrations, without attending meetings, without paying dues, in short, without cost. More ceremonial than identification, membership is shown by what is called a voice, that leftover of a word, 1 vote a year. By living on a kind of trust, the party carefully collates the relics of ancient convictions, and through that fiction of legitimacy, it succeeds in managing its affairs. It only needs, by means of opinion polls and statistics, to proliferate its citation of those phantom witnesses, thereby reciting its litany. A fairly simple technique upholds the acting out of this credibility. The polls need only concern not what directly links the adherents to the party, but that which does not attract them elsewhere, not the energy of convictions, but their inertia. If it is not true that you believe something else, it is therefore true that you are still with us. The results of this operation rely upon remnants of the membership. They reckon on the very attrition of any conviction. For those remnants indicate both the reflux of what the respondents had believed in and the lack of a stronger credibility that might lead them away. The voices are not withdrawing, they are staying put. They are still there where they were. They give rise to the same total. The account becomes an accounting. This fiction could well serve as an appendix to Borges's Esse est percipi. It is the apologue of a shift that figures do not show, one that affects beliefs. By way of an initial approximation, I take belief to mean not what is believed, a dogma, a program, etc., but the investiture of subjects in a proposition, the act of uttering it while holding it to be true, in other words, a modality of the affirmation rather than its content. Now, the capacity to believe seems to be receding everywhere in the political field. It underlay the functioning of authority. Since Hobbes, political philosophy, especially in its English tradition, has deemed that connection to be fundamental. Through that linkage, politics makes explicit its relationship of difference and continuity with religion. In both instances, however, the determination to inspire belief on which the institution lives is providing a respondent with a quest for love and/or identity. It is therefore important to consider the forms taken by belief in our societies and the practices that form the origin of such displacements. The devaluation of beliefs. For a long time it was supposed that the reserves of belief were indefinite. On the sea of credulity, one needed only create islets of rationality to set out and ensure the fragile conquests of a critical method. The rest, seen as inexhaustible, was presumed transferable to other objects and other aims, as waterfalls are harnessed and used by hydroelectric power. One tried to capture this force and to move it from one place to another. From those so-called pagan societies in which it was at home, it was directed towards the Christianity it was supposed to support. From the churches, it was then moved on towards a monarchical politics. Next, from a traditionalist religiosity, towards the institutions of the republic, of national education, or the types of socialism. Such conversions consisted in capturing the energy of belief by transporting it. What was not transferable, or had not yet been transferred to the new realms of progress, was regarded as superstition. What was usable by the ruling order was deemed conviction. The resources were so rich that in exploiting them one forgot the need to analyze them. Campaigns and crusades entailed investing the energy of belief in good sites and good objects of belief. Gradually, belief became polluted, like the air or the water. This motive energy, still resistant, albeit manageable, began to run out. It was noticed without knowing what it is. An odd paradox. All the polemics and reflections on ideological content and the institutional framework to be provided for it have not, except in English philosophy, from Hume to Wittgenstein, H. Price, Hintikka, or Quine, been accompanied by any elucidation of the nature of the act of believing. Today it no longer suffices to manipulate, transfer, and refine belief. Its composition must be analyzed, since we want to produce it artificially. Marketing, commercial or political, is still making only partial use of it. Nowadays, there are too many objects for belief and not enough credibility. An inversion has taken place. The ancient powers managed their authority ably and thereby made up for their lack of technical or administrative machinery. This consisted of client systems, of allegiances, legitimacies, and so forth. They tried nonetheless to make themselves more independent of the play of such fidelities through a rationalization, the control and organization of space. As an end result of that labor, the powers of our developed societies have fairly precise and compact procedures for the surveillance of every social network, such as the administrative and panoptic systems of police, school, health, security, etc. However, they are slowly losing their credibility. They command more strength and have less authority. Often the technicians do not concern themselves about this at all, busy as they are with extending and complicating the machinery for maintenance and surveillance. False confidence. The sophistication of discipline does not compensate for the disinvestment of subjects. In businesses, the letting go of workers is increasing more rapidly than the police control apparatus of which it is the target, the pretext, and the effect. Waste of produce, misuse of time, feather bedding, job turnover, and absenteeism among the staff, etc. Such things erode from within a system, which, like the Toyota plants, tends to become prison-like to prevent anything escaping. In administration, offices, and even in political or religious organizations, the cancer invading the machinery corresponds to the disappearance of convictions. It also causes it. Interest cannot replace belief. Belief is being exhausted. Or rather, it has sought refuge in the media and leisure activities. It has gone on vacation, yet it is nonetheless an object captured and dealt with by advertising, business, and fashion. To regain those beliefs that are fading and becoming lost, business has set about manufacturing simulacra of credibility. Shell produces the credo of values that inspire its management and that are to be adopted by its staff and its workers. The same holds true for 100 other businesses, even if they are slow to take action and continue to rely on the fictitious capital of some outmoded family business or local spirit. The material with which to inject believability into the apparatus, where is it to be found? There are two traditional sources, one political, the other religious. In the first, the overdevelopment of administrative bodies and framework takes the place of mobility or reflux of convictions among militants. In the second, on the contrary, institutions in the process of decaying or of isolating themselves allow the beliefs that they had long fomented, maintained, and controlled to become dissipated. An archaeology, the transits of belief. The relationship between these two bases are strange and long-standing. 1. Religiosity seems easy to exploit. Marketing firms are turning back enthusiastically to fragments of beliefs that were only yesterday violently being combated as superstitious. Advertising is becoming evangelical. Many administrators on the economic and social levels, who are disturbed by the slow sinking of the churches, in which repose the remains of the values, are trying to re-enlist their services by christening them up to date. Before these beliefs can go down with the ships that carry them, they are precipitously being unloaded by businesses and administrations. The people who use these relics no longer believe in them. Nevertheless, they employ them and imbue them with the kinds of integrist and ideological and financial associations in order to recaulk these old leaky tubs and turn the churches into museums of beliefs without believers, thus preserved for exploitation by liberal capitalism. Such a salvage operation works on the basis of two tactical hypotheses, both probably false. The first postulates that belief remains attached to its objects, and that by preserving the latter you retain the former. In fact, as demonstrated by both history and semiotics, the investment of belief passes from myth to myth, from ideology to ideology, or from utterance to utterance. Thus belief withdraws from a myth and leaves it more or less intact, but disarmed and changed into a document. In the course of these transits, the conviction that it's still attached to the terrain it is gradually abandoning cannot win out against the currents that are moving elsewhere. There is no equivalence between the objects that still cleave to it and those that mobilize it elsewhere. The other tactic no longer assumes that belief remains tied to its prime objects, but rather that, on the contrary, it can be separated from them artificially, that its flight towards the narratives of the media, towards leisure paradises, towards inner or communal retreats, etc., can be halted or diverted, that one might thus bring it back to the fold, to the disciplinary order it has left. However, conviction does not so easily re-sprout in the fields it has abandoned. It cannot be so easily brought back to administrations or businesses that have become unbelievable. The liturgies that attempt to enliven and revalue the workplace do not transform its functioning. They do not, therefore, produce believers. The public is not that credulous. It is amused by such festivals and simulacra. It does not go along. 2. Political organizations are slowly replacing churches as the sites of the practices of belief, but because of this they appear to have been haunted by the return of a very ancient, pre-Christian, and very pagan alliance between power and the religious life. It is as though when the religions ceased to be an autonomous power, spiritual power as it was called, politics once again became religious. Christianity had cut through the interlacing of the visible objects of belief, political authorities, and its invisible objects, gods, spirits, etc. But it retained that distinction only by establishing a clerical, dogmatic, and sacramental power in the place left vacant by the temporary deterioration of the political at the end of the age of antiquity. In the 11th and 12th centuries, ecclesiastical power, under the banner of the peace of God, imposed its order on clashing civil powers. Succeeding centuries were marked by the deterioration of that order to the benefit of princes. In the 17th century, the churches received their models and their rights from the monarchies, even if they still evidenced a religiosity that legitimized power, and that it little by little turned to its credit. With the crumbling of this ecclesiastical power 3 centuries ago, beliefs flowed back towards the political, but without carrying with them the divine or celestial values the churches had set aside, controlled, and taken in hand. This complicated round trip, which passed from politics to Christian religion, and from that religion to a new politics, resulted in an individualization of beliefs, common frames of reference breaking down into social opinions or private convictions, and of their fields of action in an increasingly diversified network of possible objects. The notion of democracy was consonant with the will to control this multiplication of convictions that had replaced the faith upon which an order had been based. It is striking that in breaking down the old system, i.e., the religious credibility of politics, Christianity finally compromised the feasibility of that religion it had detached from politics. It contributed to the devaluation of what it had appropriated in order to render it autonomous, and it thereby made possible the reflux of beliefs towards political authorities hitherto deprived of, or freed from, those spiritual authorities that had once been as much a principle of relativization as of legitimization. The return of a pagan repression had thus been affected by this fall from the spiritual. The erosion of Christianity left an indelible mark on modern times. The incarnation or historicization that Rousseau, in the 18th century, was already calling a civil religion. In contrast to the pagan state, which drew no distinction between its gods and its laws, Rousseau posited a citizen's religion, whose articles it was up to the sovereign to establish. If anyone, after having publicly accepted those dogmas, behaves as if he does not believe in them, he is to be put to death. Different from the civil religion of the citizen was a spiritual religion of man, the individual, asocial, and universal religion of la profession de foi du vicaire savoyard. That prophetic view, far less incoherent than has been suggested, already articulates the development of a body of civil and political dogma on the radicalization of an individual conscience freed from all dogma and deprived of power. Sociological analysis has since proved that prediction to be correct. Hence, belief is reinvested solely in the political system, to the extent that the spiritual powers, which had guaranteed civil powers in antiquity and which entered into competition with those of the Christian West, fall out of circulation and are disseminated or miniaturized. The institution of the real. The media changed the profound silence of things into its opposite. Once constituted in secret, the real now jabbers away. We are surrounded by news, information, statistics, and opinion polls. Never has history talked so much or shown so much. Never indeed have the gods' ministers made them speak so continuously, in such detail and so injunctively, as the producers of revelations and rules do today in the name of topicality. Our orthodoxy is made up of narrations of what's going on. Statistical debates are our theological wars. The combatants no longer bear ideas as offensive or defensive arms. They move forward camouflaged as facts, data, and events. They set themselves up as messengers of a reality. Their uniform is the color of the economic and social earth. When they advance, the ground itself seems to advance. But in fact, they manufacture it, they simulate it, they cover themselves with it, they believe in it. They thus create the stage of their law. Malville, Calcai, Poisson, the Polisario Front, the nuclear question, Khomeini, Reagan, etc., these fragments of history organize themselves into doctrinal articles. Be silent, says the speaker or the political office holder. There are the facts. Here are the data, the circumstances, etc. Therefore you must. The real, as told to us, interminably dictates what must be believed and what must be done. And what can one reply to such facts? We can only bow down and obey what they, these oracles, signify, as with the oracle at Delphi. Thus, the manufacture of simulacra provides the means of producing believers and, therefore, adherents. This institution of the real is the most visible form of our contemporary dogma. It is also, therefore, the most disputed among parties. It no longer has its own site, its own headquarters, or its own ultimate authority. Information, a private code, innovates and saturates the social body. From morning till evening, unceasingly, streets and buildings are haunted by narratives. They articulate our existences by teaching us what they should be. They cover the event, i.e., they make our legends. Legenda equals that which must be read and said. Seized from the moment of awakening by the radio, the voice is the law. The listener walks all day through a forest of narrativities, journalistic, advertising, and televised, which, at night, slip a few final messages under the door of sleep. More than the God recounted to us by the theologians of the past, these tales have a function of providence and predestination. They organize our work, our celebrations, even our dreams, in advance. Social life multiplies the gestures and modes of behavior imprinted by the narrative models. It continually reproduces and stores up the copies of narratives. Our society has become a narrated society in a threefold sense. It is defined by narratives, the fables of our advertising and information, by quotations of them, by their interminable recitation. Such narratives have the strange and twofold power of changing sight into belief and of manufacturing reality out of simulacra, a dual inversion. On the one hand, modernity, once born of an observant will struggling against credulity and basing itself on a contract between the seen and the real, has now transformed that relationship and gives to be seen precisely what must be believed. The scope, the status, and the objects of vision are defined by fiction. The media, advertising, or political representation all function in this way. Of course, fiction also existed in the past, but within circumscribed aesthetic and theatrical sites. Fiction indicated itself as such thanks to perspective, for example, the art of illusion. With its own ground rules and production conditions, it provided its own meta-language. It spoke solely in the name of language. It narrativized symbolics, leaving the truth of things suspended and almost secret. Today, fiction claims to presentify the real. to speak in the name of facts, and thus to cause the simulacrum it produces to be taken as a symptom of reference. Those to whom these legends are addressed, and who pay for them, are therefore no longer obliged to believe what they cannot see, the traditional position, but rather to believe what they do see, the contemporary position. The inversion of the terrain on which beliefs develop is the result of a mutation in the paradigms of knowledge. The visibility of the real is substituted for the earlier postulate, its invisibility. The sociocultural scene of modernity refers back to a myth. It defines the social referent by its visibility, and thus by its scientific or political representativity. On the basis of this new postulate, the belief that the real is visible, it articulates the possibility of what we know, what we observe, our proofs, and our practices. In this new arena, the infinitely extendable field of optical investigations and of a scopic drive, there still remains the strange collusion between belief and the question of the real. But now it is played out within the element of the seen, the observed, or the shown. In short, the contemporary simulacrum is the last localization of the belief in sight. It is the identification of the seen with what is to be believed. Once we have abandoned the hypothesis that holds that the waters of an invisible ocean, the real, haunts the shores of the visible and create the effects, the decipherable signs or the misleading reflections of its presence. The simulacrum is what the relationship of the visible to the real becomes when the postulate of an invisible immensity of the being or beings hidden behind appearances crumbles. Society recited. In the face of narratives of images, which nowadays are no more than fictions, visible and readable productions, the spectator-observer knows perfectly well that they are but simulacra, the results of manipulations. I know perfectly well it's a joke. But even so, he assumes for those simulations the status of reality. A belief survives the denial created by all that we know about their manufacture. As a television viewer said, had it been untrue, you would have been able to tell. He postulated other social sites that could guarantee what he knew to be fictitious, and that is what allowed him to believe it anyway, as though belief could no longer be couched in direct convictions, but only through the detour of what others are supposed to believe. Belief is no longer based on an invisible otherness concealed behind signs, but on what other groups, other fields, or other disciplines are supposed to be. The real is what, in each place, the reference to another causes to be believed. And the same holds for the scientific disciplines. For example, the relationship between computing and history functions on the basis of an astonishing quid pro quo. From computers, historians seek the accreditation of a scientific power that can lend a technical, real weight to their discourse. From history, the computer scientists seek validation through the reality created by concrete manifestations of knowledge. Each expects from the other a guarantee that gives weight to their simulacrum. The same holds true politically. Each party derives its credibility from what it believes and causes to be believed about its referent, the revolutionary miracles performed in the East, or its adversary, the faults and woes of the wicked on the other side. Each political discourse creates effects of reality out of what it assumes and causes to be assumed about the economic analysis on which it is based, an analysis that is itself validated by this reference to the political. Within each party, the professional discourses of the responsible leadership stand up thanks to the credulity those leaders assume on the part of the rank-and-file militants, or the voters, and, on the other hand, the "I am well aware that it's a joke" of many voters is countered by what they postulate, out of conviction or out of knowledge, about the cadres of the political apparatus. Belief thus functions on the basis of the value of the real that is assumed anyway in the other, even when one knows perfectly well, all too well, the extent to which it's all bullshit on one's own side. Quotation, then, is the ultimate weapon for making one believe. Because it plays upon what the other is assumed to believe, it is the means by which reality is instituted. To quote the other on one's own behalf is thus to make believable the simulacra produced in a particular place. Opinion polls have become the most elementary and the most passive procedure for doing this. Perpetual self-quotation, the proliferation of polls, is the fiction through which the country is brought to believe in what it is. Each citizen assumes for all the others what he takes to be their belief, without believing in it himself. By replacing doctrines that have become unbelievable, quotation allows the technocratic apparatuses to make themselves feasible for each person in the name of the others. To quote is to give reality to the simulacrum a power produces by causing a belief that others believe in it, but without furnishing any believable object. However, it is also to designate the anarchists or deviants, to quote them to the public, to hand over to the aggressivity of the public those who, affirming through their deeds that they do not believe in it, destroy the fictitious reality that no one can support anyway, except as the conviction of the others. To the extent that this opinion-making instrument can be manipulated by those who wield it, one is quite justified in wondering about the ability it offers to change belief into distrust, into suspicion, even into denunciation, and about whether citizens can control politically that which provides the circular and pointless trustworthiness to political life itself.